I'm Veronica, 32 years old. And if you had told me that one ordinary family dinner in our Irvine home would flip my entire world upside down, I would have laughed in your face. I work in marketing. I can spot a sales pitch, a manipulative angle, a rehearsed performance from a mile away. But nothing prepared me for the night my own blood turned into strangers. It started a few weeks after my grandmother passed away. Pamela wasn't just a grandmother, she was my anchor. Her death was still raw, and I was stumbling through the fog of grief when a text from my dad buzzed on my phone. Quick family dinner, important matters. No emojis, no casual tone, just stiff formality that made my stomach twist. By the time I turned onto the familiar cul-de-sac, something felt wrong. My parents' house looked the same. Fresh paint, manicured hedges, warm porch light glowing. But the air was heavy, like I was stepping onto a stage where everyone else had memorized their lines, and I was the only one walking in blind. Inside, Mom welcomed me with her too bright smile and a hug that lingered a second too long. Dad gave me a curt nod instead of his usual warmth. My sister Sabrina barely looked up from her phone, tossing me a lazy, "Hey," while her diamond-crusted watch caught the light. We sat down to steaming plates of lasagna, Mom's signature dish, the one she always used when she wanted to butter someone up or soften bad news. But the flavor was buried under tension. Smiles looked painted on, conversation stumbled in circles. And then I saw it. On the side table, half hidden under a napkin, were documents. Legal papers, my name at the top, my signature at the bottom, or at least someone's clumsy attempt at it. My heart slammed against my ribs. They were forging my signature on trust fund documents. In that instant, 100 memories came rushing back. Sabrina's recklessness, my parents' endless enabling, Pamela's warnings whispered over diner breakfasts. And now it was all colliding here over a plate of lasagna with my family plotting to rob me of the one thing Pamela had left behind. But I didn't flinch. Years of pitching clients and negotiating contracts had taught me one thing: never show your hand too soon. So I smiled. I sipped my wine. I let them steer the small talk toward what they called family finances. Inside, I was calculating. Because what they didn't know was that Pamela and I had built safeguards. The accounts they were drooling over, they didn't hold a fortune. They held one single dollar, and a red alert system designed to scream the second anyone tried to break in. And that, right there, was only the beginning. Before I take you deeper into how I flipped this entire situation on its head, do me a favor. Drop a comment telling me where you're watching from and hit subscribe, because trust me, you do not want to miss what comes next. This story only gets messier from here. Back at the table, the performance carried on. Sabrina twirled her fork lazily, her eyes darting everywhere but mine. Mom kept rearranging the cheese platter, her hands trembling slightly. Dad cleared his throat, gearing up like he was chairing a business meeting. "We've been thinking," he started, folding his napkin with precision, "about Pamela's estate." His voice was calm, rehearsed, almost clinical. Mom nodded, chiming in softly. "Your sister's facing a hard time, honey. Since you're financially stable, it makes sense for you to share a portion, just to help her get back on her feet." Share. That was their word for it. But the forged papers I'd seen told the real story. They weren't asking. They were taking. I leaned back, forcing myself to stay collected. "What kind of hard time are we talking about?" I asked, my tone neutral. Sabrina shifted, her glossy lips forming a pout. "Some ventures didn't work out, okay? I I need a reset. A little boost." Dad jumped in, filling the silence. 250,000 should do it. Clear her debts, give her a new start. 250,000. My grandmother's hard-earned legacy. Money she'd specifically protected from being drained by exactly this kind of behavior. I kept my face blank. And these debts, are they from her projects or from her lifestyle? The table went still. Mom fumbled for words. Sabrina's cheeks flushed. I pressed further. "Because from what I've seen, condos, vacations, that car outside, this doesn't look like business failure. It looks like overspending." That was when Sabrina snapped. "Who told you that? Scott? That bitter ex doesn't know anything." The slip was perfect. She'd just confirmed everything I already knew. Dad leaned in, his voice tightening. The point is, family supports each other. You're doing fine. Sabrina needs this more. And that's when I decided to play my card. Calmly, I set my phone on the table. A notification glowed on the screen. Unauthorized access attempt detected. The system had worked. Someone had just tried to break into the trust. I turned the phone toward them. You see this? That's fraud. Banks flag forged signatures fast. Could even lead to charges. The room exploded. Mom gasped. Sabrina lunged for my phone. Dad's face drained of color. But I stayed calm. Because Pamela had made sure of one thing. The estate they thought they were stealing from? It was already locked down, untouchable, and tonight their mask had slipped for good. That dinner was just the start. What happened afterward? The lawsuits, the betrayals, the fallout. I'll take you through it all. But first you need to understand how we even got here. To understand why my family believed they could take what was mine, you have to go back. Back to when I was just a kid in Irvine, sitting across from Pamela at a diner booth, while she taught me lessons that would one day save me from my own blood. When I think back on my earliest memories, the ones that shaped me most, they don't start in classrooms or playgrounds. They start at a corner booth in a little diner off the main road in Irvine. The kind of place with cracked leather seats, the smell of coffee baked into the walls, and a jukebox that hadn't been touched since the 80s. That's where Pamela, my grandmother, my mentor, my safe place, taught me lessons I carry to this day. She never lectured the way teachers did. Instead, she made it simple, almost like a game. One Saturday morning, while kids my age were glued to cartoons, I was perched across from her as she slid a pizza across the table and began slicing it into uneven wedges. This slice, she said, pointing to the largest piece, is for rent and food. You can't live without the basics. She cut another, smaller. This one's for savings, for the future, for the day when things get hard. Another sliver went to the side. This here is for helping others when you can. Finally, she pinched off a tiny corner. And this little bit? That's for you. A treat. Something you enjoy without guilt. Because if you never enjoy your money, what's the point? I was 8 years old and I understood budgeting better than most adults. By 12, I'd set up a notebook ledger, tracking every dollar from babysitting or raking leaves in the neighborhood. Pamela would watch me scribble with my stubby pencil, nodding with quiet pride. She never once told me I was being too serious or too stingy. Instead, she'd say, "Discipline now means freedom later, Veronica. You're teaching yourself independence." By 16, I'd saved enough from babysitting and dog walking to open my very first investment account. Pamela sat beside me at the bank, sipping her coffee while I signed the papers, her eyes shining. Later at her apartment, she'd go over the statements with me, never telling me what to do outright, just nudging me with questions. What do you notice here? Why do you think this fund grew while that one stayed flat? It wasn't just financial literacy she was teaching me. It was confidence. The idea that I could handle my own life without leaning on anyone else. And then there was Sabrina. 3 years older and living in what felt like an entirely different universe. Where I pinched pennies, she spent them like water slipping through her fingers. She always had a reason. It's just fashion, Mom. Everyone's wearing this. Or an excuse. My old phone broke. Dad, what do you want me to do? Fail at school because I can't text my friends? She could burn through her allowance before the week was half over. And my parents, Cheryl and Trevor, never batted an eye. If Sabrina ran out of money, they topped her off. If she broke something, they paid for repairs. If she forgot to save for a trip or lost a jacket, they covered it without hesitation. They framed it as helping, as supporting her needs. But for me, it felt like a constant reminder. She got cushions. I got responsibility. One memory is burned into me like a scar. I was 14, and after months of saving, I finally had enough to buy a basic laptop. Nothing fancy, just something I could use for school projects. The very day I planned to buy it, Sabrina crashed her skateboard into a neighbor's mailbox, splintering the wood and bending the metal. Instead of making her work off the cost, my parents dipped into my savings jar. They promised they'd repay me soon. They never did. So I sweated through extra yard work in the blazing Irvine sun to rebuild the money I'd lost. My hands blistered, my jaw clenched in frustration. Sabrina? She got a brand new skateboard a week later. That was our family dynamic in a nutshell. Sabrina's chaos padded by safety nets, my efforts siphoned off in silence. Pamela noticed, of course. She always did. At the diner one morning, as I stabbed my fork into a stack of pancakes, she leaned in close. "Family matters, Veronica," she told me, her voice soft but firm. "But family does not mean letting people drain you dry. Boundaries aren't cruelty. They're survival." I didn't fully grasp it then, but as I grew older, those words became my lifeline. Sabrina's habits only intensified as we moved into our teenage years. She wrecked a bike in the park during some daredevil stunt, crashing into a parked car and shattering the side mirror. Instead of teaching her responsibility, Mom and Dad quietly took money from the small college savings account I'd started with babysitting money. They said it was a family matter. They swore they'd put it back. They didn't. By the time Sabrina graduated, she was shipped off to a private university up north, her tuition fully covered despite her mediocre grades and her tendency to skip classes. She drifted from major to major, partied through semesters, and failed courses. But Mom and Dad wrote check after check to cover her resets. I, on the other hand, stayed local at a state school, piecing together scholarships and working part-time jobs to keep myself afloat. While Sabrina partied, I pulled late-night shifts in coffee shops, balancing textbooks with latte foam, clinging to the GPA I needed to keep my financial aid. The contrast was stark, and it grew sharper with every passing year. Looking back now, I see how deliberate Pamela had been. She was quietly molding me, equipping me to stand on my own while the rest of the family crumbled under entitlement. But at the time, it just felt lonely. Because as Sabrina floated, I hustled. As she leaned on our parents, I built my own backbone. And even though Pamela reassured me that my independence was strength, there was a sting every time I watched my sister get bailed out, rewarded for mistakes while I was punished for responsibility. That imbalance, those early cracks, were the blueprint for everything that came later. And when Pamela's health failed years down the road and the inheritance came into play, those cracks didn't just widen, they split into canyons no one could cross. The call came on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon, the kind of day where nothing feels remarkable until suddenly everything does. Pamela's doctor didn't sugarcoat it. Stage 4 cancer. The words hollowed me out like someone had scooped the air from my lungs. I remember sitting in my car in the office parking lot, my hands gripping the steering wheel, staring blankly at the dashboard while my coworkers went about their lives inside. The world felt unchanged, but mine had tilted forever. Pamela had always been my constant. The one person who reminded me that strength and compassion weren't opposites. And now the woman who had carried me through life's rough edges was being handed months, maybe less. I didn't hesitate. I filed for family leave from my marketing job, reshuffled client projects, postponed campaigns. Work could wait. Pamela couldn't. The next 6 months became a blur of hospital corridors and freeway drives under Irvine's endless sun. Mornings started with the scent of antiseptic, the steady beep of monitors, and the weight of waiting rooms. Afternoons meant chemo sessions, sitting by her side while she fought nausea with brave smiles. Evenings, I'd drive her back to her apartment, tuck her into her favorite chair, and brew her the herbal tea she swore eased the pain. I tried to give her comfort in small ways. Soft blankets, mystery novels read aloud in quiet voices, playlists of songs she loved from her younger years. And in the spaces between, I prayed silently for more time. Pamela never lost her wit. Even as the treatments drained her, she'd crack jokes about hospital food or tease me for fussing too much. "Don't hover like a mother hen," she'd say with a smirk, though her hand always tightened around mine. And then there was Sabrina. In 6 months, she showed up twice. Both times felt more like performances than visits. The first, she breezed in with takeout from some trendy restaurant, dropping names of dishes like she was reciting a menu. She stayed less than an hour, filling the silence with chatter about a new subscription box business she was planning. Halfway through, she asked Pamela for seed money, called it a golden investment opportunity. Pamela, pale and exhausted, gently declined. She didn't argue, just gave me a weary glance, one that said, "You see? You understand." The second visit followed the same script. A little small talk, a few half-hearted pats on Pamela's hand, and then hints about needing money to grow her network. By the time she left early, citing work stuff, I realized she hadn't come to offer comfort. She came to test what she could still extract. Pamela noticed too. One afternoon, when the house was quiet and sunlight spilled through her blinds, she looked at me with steady eyes. The oxygen tube in her nose couldn't dull the sharpness in her voice. "Veronica, there's something we need to do privately." She directed me to call her attorney, Mr. Sutton, a name I vaguely recognized from family gatherings but had never dealt with personally. I dialed from her phone, putting it on speaker. He answered warmly, but with that professional edge of someone who knew why he'd been summoned. He said he'd been expecting the call. Over the following weeks, Pamela worked with him to draft something ironclad, an irrevocable trust, one that pulled all her assets, savings, investments, even the deed to her apartment, out of the estate and into a structure no one could tamper with. She didn't just rely on paperwork. She involved her sister, my Aunt Cheryl, as witness. Cheryl coordinated notaries, verified medical affidavits of Pamela's mental clarity, and stood by every signature. Pamela was determined that no one could later claim she hadn't been in her right mind. One evening, sitting by her window with Irvine's skyline glowing in the distance, Pamela explained her reasoning to me directly. "I love your mother and I love your father, but they've spoiled Sabrina to her own ruin. Loans, excuses, bailouts. It's a cycle they don't even see anymore. And I was complicit for too long. I should have stepped in years ago, but I won't let what I've built vanish into that same pattern. This trust is for you, Veronica, because you'll use it wisely, because you won't waste it." Her words weighed heavy, both a gift and a burden. Part of me wrestled with guilt. My parents didn't know. Sabrina didn't know. And yet here we were, pulling strings in secrecy, but Pamela's stories of years past, requests for money, excuses made on Sabrina's behalf, replayed in my mind. Every sacrifice I'd been forced to make as a child, every time my efforts had been swallowed by their favoritism. She wasn't just leaving me assets, she was leaving me freedom. One night, her voice faint, she whispered, "Now I can rest. I know you'll be okay. That matters most." Not long after, Pamela was gone. We buried her under Irvine's bright sky, surrounded by flowers she would have thought too expensive. Family stood together in somber silence, but beneath it, fractures pulsed unseen. Because none of them knew the truth yet. They thought the inheritance would fall into familiar patterns. Chaos for Sabrina, control for my parents. But Pamela had shifted the ground beneath their feet. And when that truth finally surfaced, the fallout would rip our family apart. Dinner should have been ordinary. A weekend evening in Irvine, the smell of garlic bread wafting from the kitchen, the clinking of silverware against porcelain. But the moment I walked in, I knew something was off. My parents greeted me with smiles stretched too tight, voices pitched just a little too cheerful. Sabrina was already at the table, her arms folded smugly across her chest, the kind of expression that said she was in on a joke I hadn't heard yet. The air hummed with unease. We sat down, bowls passed, plates filled. Small talk floated across the table, thin and brittle. I tried to play along, but my instincts prickled. Pamela had warned me to trust those instincts. Tonight, they screamed that something was wrong. Halfway through the meal, Sabrina leaned back, her smirk widening. "So," she said casually, "we should probably talk about Grandma's estate. Don't you think?" The words dropped like glass shattering. I froze. The room went quiet except for the ticking of the wall clock. My parents exchanged glances before my father cleared his throat. "Veronica," he began, his tone rehearsed, "there are some adjustments that need to be made. Pamela was sick for a long time. She wasn't always thinking clearly." My stomach knotted. "What adjustments?" That's when my mother slid a folder across the table. Neat, crisp papers, legal headers at the top. My name printed in places I didn't expect. I scanned the first page, and my blood ran cold. According to this document, Pamela's trust had been revised. The majority of assets, her investments, her apartment, even her savings, were being redirected. Not to me, as she'd intended, but to Sabrina. It was a lie. Pamela had gone out of her way to make sure her trust was locked down, untouchable. I had been there for the notaries, the signatures, the witnesses. These papers weren't a revision. They were a forgery. I lifted my eyes slowly from the page. "This isn't real," I said flatly. Sabrina rolled her eyes, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "Oh, come on, Veronica. Don't play dumb. You know Grandma wasn't in her right mind those last few months. You were hovering around her every second, whispering in her ear, pushing her to give you everything. Everyone saw it." Her words were a blade, sharp and deliberate. "You weren't there," I snapped, the heat rising in my chest. "You visited twice. Twice, Sabrina. And both times you asked her for money. That's all you ever did. Don't you dare stand here and tell me you know what she wanted." My mother's voice cut in, brittle and defensive. "Veronica, that's enough. This isn't about who visited when. This is about what's fair. Sabrina has needs too. You can't expect to take everything for yourself. That's not what family does." "Fair?" The word tasted bitter. "You drained my savings to cover Sabrina's mistakes. You stole from me when I was 14, when I was trying to buy a laptop. You called it fair then too. And now you want to erase Pamela's wishes because you don't like them?" The room pulsed with silence, heavy and suffocating. My father finally spoke, his tone stern, authoritative. "Veronica, be reasonable. Sign the papers. End this peacefully. Fighting will only bring ugliness. This is what Pamela would have wanted. For her granddaughters to share, not fight." I laughed, a harsh, humorless sound. "Don't you dare use her name to justify this. Pamela made her choice. She trusted me because she knew I wouldn't waste it. And she locked that trust so tight not even you could touch it. What you've done here, it's criminal." Sabrina's smirk faltered, replaced by a flash of anger. "You think you're so perfect, don't you? Always the favorite, always the little saint with her nose in a ledger. Grandma didn't love you more, she just pitied you. You manipulated her, and I'm not letting you steal what's rightfully mine." Her voice cracked on the last word. "Mine." In that moment, the truth crystallized. This wasn't just greed. This was obsession. Sabrina had spent her whole life cushioned by handouts, convinced the world owed her. And now, faced with the one person who had finally said no, she was unraveling. I slid the papers back across the table, my hands steady despite the storm inside me. "I'm not signing anything," I said. "Not today. Not ever. And if you try to push this further, I'll take every one of you to court. Pamela trusted me to protect what she built. And that's exactly what I'm going to do." The silence that followed was deafening. My parents' faces hardened, disappointment etched into every line. Sabrina glared at me like I'd just declared war. Maybe I had. But I didn't flinch. Pamela had once told me boundaries weren't cruelty, they were survival. And tonight, I finally understood what she meant. This wasn't just about money. This was about breaking the cycle. And I was ready to fight. I left that dinner table with my pulse pounding so hard it echoed in my ears. The folder of forged papers stayed behind, but the betrayal followed me out the door like a shadow. The cool Irvine night air should have steadied me. Instead, it felt suffocating. Every step to my car, every click of my heels against the pavement was weighted with the realization that my family hadn't just turned on me. They'd plotted it. Together. By the time I reached home, my phone was buzzing nonstop. Missed calls, voicemails, a string of texts lighting up my screen like fireworks. "Dad, Veronica, come back. We can talk this out." "Mom, don't throw away your family over this. Pamela would want peace." "Sabrina, you're seriously insane if you think you're walking away with all of it. Stop embarrassing yourself." I tossed the phone face down on my nightstand, the glow searing into my skull. I wanted silence. Just for a moment. But silence didn't last. The next morning, more messages came, this time more desperate. "Mom, you're our daughter, Veronica. Don't let money blind you." "Dad, be rational. What's a few papers compared to family?" "Sabrina, I'm warning you, if you push this, I'll ruin you. Everyone will know the truth about what you did." The truth. That word stung, because I knew what she meant. She was going to spin her own narrative. And she did. Within a week, I started hearing from cousins, old family friends, even a few distant relatives I hadn't spoken to in years. All of them had concerns. All of them had heard things. Sabrina had wasted no time painting me as a manipulator, the greedy granddaughter who preyed on a dying woman. She called me selfish, heartless, ungrateful. She said I'd poisoned Pamela against her own family, whispering lies while Pamela was too weak to resist. Every time I opened social media, I saw vague posts from Sabrina about snakes in the family and fake saints. People in her circle chimed in, offering sympathy, painting her as the victim of some cruel betrayal. It was infuriating and isolating. Because for every lie Sabrina spread, I stayed quiet. Not because I couldn't defend myself, but because Pamela's dignity mattered more than public spectacle. She hadn't raised me to air private pain for the world's entertainment. Instead, I called Mr. Sutton. He didn't sound surprised when I told him what had happened. "I've seen this before," he said calmly. "Grief does strange things to families. Entitlement does stranger things. But Pamela's trust was airtight. They can scream, they can accuse, they can even try to forge papers. But in the eyes of the law, they don't have a leg to stand on." He advised me to prepare for escalation, to gather every document, every witness statement, every scrap of proof that Pamela had acted with full mental clarity. Aunt Cheryl stepped in immediately, promising her testimony. The notaries, the doctors who signed off, the legal witnesses, all of them ready to affirm Pamela's decisions. Still, the weight pressed down on me. Because this wasn't just about law. This was blood. This was family. My parents doubled down, calling at odd hours, leaving voicemails that twisted guilt into daggers. "Veronica, you're tearing us apart. Your grandmother wasn't well. She didn't know what she was doing. You'll regret this when we're gone. Money won't hug you when you're alone." Each message left me hollow and furious all at once. And then the inevitable arrived. A manila envelope on my doorstep. Thick. Heavy. Inside, court papers. Sabrina, backed quietly by my parents, was formally contesting Pamela's trust. They were accusing me of coercion, claiming I had manipulated Pamela in her fragile state, that I'd schemed to cut Sabrina out, exploiting Pamela's illness for personal gain. I sat at my kitchen table, papers spread out, the ink still sharp and smelling faintly chemical. My hands trembled, but not from fear, from rage. They were dragging Pamela's name through mud to justify their greed. I closed my eyes, letting the anger settle into something colder, something sharper. Pamela had once told me, "Strength isn't loud, Veronica. Sometimes it's just not moving when everyone else is trying to push you over." That night I promised her, wherever she was, that I wouldn't move. I would fight. Even if it meant standing alone against the people who should have loved me most. Even if it meant losing the last fragile strands of family I had left. Because this wasn't just inheritance anymore. This was survival. And the war had officially begun. The day of the first hearing dawned gray and heavy, the kind of sky that seemed to mirror the weight in my chest. I drove to the courthouse in silence, the hum of my old sedan the only sound. My parents and Sabrina had hired a polished probate attorney from Los Angeles, a man with a reputation for cutting down opponents in family disputes. Meanwhile, I had Mr. Sutton, steady and unflinching, with Aunt Cheryl walking beside me like a shield. When I entered the courtroom, Sabrina was already seated at the front, dressed in a sleek black blazer, her hair styled perfectly as though this were some kind of performance. She didn't look at me. She didn't have to. The smug curl of her lips as she whispered to Mom said enough. Dad avoided my gaze entirely. He stared straight ahead, jaw tight, like I was some stranger who'd wandered in. The judge, a woman in her early 50s with sharp eyes, called the room to order. The opening statements were exactly what I expected. Sabrina's attorney painting me as the manipulative granddaughter, swooping in during Pamela's last months, isolating her from the rest of the family. He used words like coercion and undue influence, his voice dripping with practiced sympathy. I sat there, still as stone, as though my silence could anchor me against the lies. Then it was Mr. Sutton's turn. He stood with quiet confidence, no theatrics, no dramatics. "Your Honor," he began, "the opposing party claims manipulation." What we will present today is evidence of clarity, preparation, and Pamela's deliberate actions taken months before her decline. We have witnesses, notarized documents, and medical affidavits. Pamela was not coerced. She was protecting her legacy. The judge nodded slightly, as if already sensing where the wind was blowing. Testimonies began. Aunt Cheryl took the stand first, her voice firm, unwavering. She described Pamela's sharpness, how she had personally witnessed the signing of the trust, how Pamela insisted it be done privately because she didn't trust her own daughter, my mother, to respect her wishes. Cheryl's presence filled the room with an unshakable truth. Next came the notary, then the family doctor. Both confirmed Pamela's mental clarity at the time. The doctor's words landed heavily. Pamela was fully competent when she made her decisions. She specifically asked me to document her state of mind to prevent any future disputes. I glanced at Sabrina then. For the first time, I saw a crack in her composure. Her jaw tightened, her fingers fidgeted with the hem of her blazer. But she wasn't done fighting. When it was her turn to testify, she put on a performance that might have earned her an award on a stage. She spoke about her special bond with Pamela, how Pamela had always promised to support her dreams, how I had isolated Pamela during her final months, making it impossible for her to visit. She was like a second mother to me, Sabrina said, her voice breaking at just the right moment. And suddenly, Veronica was everywhere, at the hospital, at the apartment, cutting me out. I barely got to see my grandmother before she passed. I clenched my fists under the table, biting my tongue so hard I tasted iron. Because the truth was brutal. Sabrina had chosen not to be there. She had chosen her schemes, her boyfriends, her endless business ventures. But when Mr. Sutton cross-examined, her facade faltered. He pulled out phone records, showing Sabrina hadn't called Pamela more than twice during those last 6 months. He produced travel receipts. Hawaii, Miami, Paris, all trips she'd taken while Pamela was in treatment. Miss Blake, Mr. Sutton asked calmly, if Pamela was like a second mother to you, why were you in Maui the week of her 3rd chemotherapy round? The silence that followed was louder than any answer she could have given. Sabrina stammered something about work obligations, but the damage was done. The judge's eyes flicked with quiet disapproval. My parents tried to back her up, taking the stand with shaky justifications. Mom spoke of Pamela's fragility, suggesting her decisions weren't truly her own. Dad insisted family money should be shared, that Pamela had been confused in her final year, but every word unraveled against the ironclad documentation Mr. Sutton laid out. The trust's creation, the medical affidavits, the witnesses, it was all too precise, too deliberate to dismiss. By the end of the day, the judge called a recess, her voice even but pointed. This court takes allegations of forgery and undue influence very seriously. From the evidence presented so far, the validity of Pamela's trust remains intact. I walked out of that courtroom with my legs trembling, but not from weakness, from release. For the first time since the ambush dinner, I felt like the truth was visible. But outside the courthouse, Sabrina was waiting. She stormed up to me, eyes blazing. You think you've won? This isn't over, Veronica. You may have Pamela's money, but you'll lose everything else. Friends, family, reputation. You'll end up with nothing. I met her glare, my voice low, steady. I'd rather have nothing than live off lies. She flinched, just for a second, before storming off with Mom trailing behind her, whispering frantically. Dad lingered a moment longer, looking at me with something unreadable. Anger, maybe, or regret. But he didn't say a word. That night, I sat in my condo alone, the silence pressing against me. I knew Sabrina was right about one thing. I had lost my family. Maybe not legally, maybe not financially, but in every other sense. And yet, as I placed Pamela's old photo on my nightstand, her smile soft and steady, I felt something else rise inside me. I hadn't lost everything. I had my integrity. I had Pamela's legacy. And I had the strength she'd spent years planting in me like seeds that were finally breaking through the soil. This war wasn't over. But for once, I wasn't afraid of the battles ahead. Weeks bled into months, and the legal battle stretched on like a wound that refused to heal. Every filing, every motion, Every summons arrived with a thud that echoed through my condo. The courthouse became a second home. The smell of old paper, the distant chatter of clerks, the echo of footsteps down marble halls. It all became part of a rhythm I couldn't escape. Mr. Sutton remained composed through every twist. "They'll run out of fuel before long," he told me one afternoon as we reviewed yet another motion from Sabrina's lawyer. "They're burning money faster than sense." He was right. By the third hearing, Sabrina's attorney began showing signs of strain. He came in late, shuffled through his notes, his tone losing that polished edge. My parents, too, were visibly exhausted. Dad's suit no longer fit right, his face lined with fatigue. Mom looked brittle, as if one harsh word might shatter her completely. The judge didn't need much more convincing. Pamela's trust documents had held under scrutiny. The notary's records, timestamps, and financial transfers matched perfectly with her timeline of sound health. Even the hospital's digital logs showed Pamela had requested privacy settings that allowed only me and Aunt Cheryl visitation rights in her final months, a request made entirely by her, no coercion in sight. The opposing counsel tried one last desperate argument, claiming Pamela had been emotionally manipulated. The judge shut it down. "What I see," she said coolly, "is a woman who foresaw her family's dysfunction and took lawful steps to protect her estate." Case dismissed. It was over. Or at least, the court part was. The human wreckage, though, that was just beginning. Outside the courthouse, reporters waited. Small-time local journalists hungry for a scandal about money, inheritance, betrayal. Someone must have tipped them off. I didn't stop. I just walked past, sunglasses on, chin high, ignoring the flashes. That evening, I turned my phone back on after a week of silence. Dozens of missed calls, dozens more messages. But they weren't threats anymore. They were pleas. "Mom, we made mistakes, Veronica. Can't we talk?" "Dad, you've proven your point? Pamela's gone. Why keep the hate going?" "Sabrina, you've ruined our lives. Are you happy now?" I read every one of them once, then deleted them all. Because even in their apology, they couldn't see what they'd done. It wasn't about hate. It was about survival. Word spread quickly in Irvine. Friends of the family whispered about the case. Neighbors avoided eye contact at grocery stores. Sabrina's social media accounts vanished. Her businesses folded one by one, unpaid bills catching up faster than she could fabricate new ventures. Creditors began calling my parents, and soon the inevitable happened. Foreclosure notices, repossessions, the luxury SUV towed from their driveway. They filed for bankruptcy 2 months after the ruling. A mutual acquaintance told me that Mom cried when movers took her wedding china, that Dad refused to speak for days. Part of me wished I didn't know, but gossip in small cities has its own way of finding you. Aunt Cheryl and I met for lunch at a quiet cafe near the coast. The relief on her face mirrored mine, but there was sadness there too. "They did this to themselves," she said gently, stirring her coffee. "Pamela saw it coming, but she never wanted it to end this way." "I didn't either," I admitted, "but I can't go back." "No," Cheryl said, "and you shouldn't. Sometimes blood ties are the chains that keep you drowning." Her words lingered with me long after she left. That night, I sat by my window, watching Irvine's lights blink like distant stars. Pamela's framed letter sat on the desk beside me, the one she'd written months before her death, sealed and given to Mr. Sutton with strict instructions to deliver only after the legal dust settled. I unfolded it carefully. "My dearest Veronica, if you're reading this, then you've stood your ground. I know it wasn't easy. Families can love and destroy in the same breath. Don't let that confuse you. What you protected wasn't money. It was integrity. You've carried forward everything I hoped you'd learn. Now build something with it. Not for revenge, but for meaning. Love, Grandma Pamela." I cried for the first time since she passed. Not the quiet tears I'd let fall at her funeral, but deep shaking sobs that came from somewhere old inside me. The kind that hurt but healed at the same time. When I finally slept that night, I dreamt of her diner, the little booth where she used to explain life through pizza slices. Only this time she wasn't teaching. She was smiling, proud. In the weeks that followed, I began redirecting the trust funds, not into extravagance or comfort, but into purpose. I contacted community centers, financial counselors, and local schools. Slowly, the framework for the Pamela Financial Literacy Foundation began to form. Each day I worked on it, I felt lighter, like I was finally doing what Pamela wanted all along, turning pain into education, betrayal into wisdom. Sabrina and my parents faded from my world. Occasionally, their names surfaced through whispers, arguments about money, short-term jobs, constant moving. But I no longer reacted. I no longer needed to. The house I grew up in was sold to strangers. The neighborhood where we'd once had Sunday barbecues no longer felt like home. Irvine still shimmered, but my roots had shifted. What replaced it was quieter, smaller, but mine. And for the first time, the silence didn't scare me. It felt like peace. The mornings began to feel normal again. No court dates, no urgent messages. Just light creeping through the blinds, the smell of coffee, the hum of a city waking up around me. For months, I had lived in fight mode. Every sound, every letter, every call a trigger. Now my life had edges I could touch again. The first project of the Pamela Financial Literacy Foundation launched quietly. A few folding chairs in a community hall, a rented projector, and a stack of printouts. I stood at the front, palms a little sweaty, and spoke to a room of 20-odd college students about budgeting, credit, and the emotional traps that come with money. I told them about growing up with a grandmother who used pizza slices to explain life. I didn't talk about the inheritance or the court. I didn't need to. The point was to show that understanding value, real value, can keep you safe in ways a balance sheet never will. Afterward, a young woman lingered by the door. "My boyfriend keeps borrowing money and never paying it back," she said quietly. "Every time I try to say no, I feel guilty." I smiled. "That's not guilt, that's conditioning. Boundaries don't mean you love less. They mean you finally love yourself too." She nodded, tears in her eyes. That moment alone made the months of chaos worth it. The foundation grew faster than I expected. Workshops filled up. Local banks began sponsoring events. We built an online platform that reached people outside California. Each time someone wrote to say they'd paid off debt, left a manipulative situation, or started saving for the first time, I felt Pamela's presence. Steady, approving. But healing isn't linear. There were nights when loneliness crept in. I'd see families laughing at restaurants or hear coworkers talk about holiday dinners, and something inside me would twist. Therapy helped me untangle it. Dr. Sutton, no relation to my lawyer, was patient and direct. "You grieve not only for who they were," he told me, "but for who you wish they could have been." He taught me to stop checking the phone for messages I'd already decided I'd never answer, to stop replaying that dinner in my head. To accept that closure sometimes means silence. Journaling became a nightly ritual. Some pages were angry, others soft. I wrote about Pamela's stories, about Sabrina's face in the courtroom, about how freedom can feel both empty and full at once. Slowly, the entries shifted from survival to gratitude. Aunt Cheryl remained my anchor. We had dinner every Sunday. Nothing fancy, just two women rebuilding what family was supposed to mean. Sometimes we laughed about small things: bad takeout, crooked picture frames, her stubborn cat. Other nights we talked about Pamela, about legacy, about how love sometimes requires walking away. One evening, she handed me a worn box tied with ribbon. "Found this while sorting Pamela's things," she said. Inside were old photos, receipts, and a single note in Pamela's handwriting, for Veronica, so she remembers where strength begins. Beneath it was the little notebook I'd used as a kid to track chore money, pages filled with childish scrawl and crooked math. I laughed and cried at the same time. That ledger had been the first brick in the wall that saved me. Months turned to a year. The foundation became stable, recognized, even featured in a local magazine. My days were filled with numbers, stories, and new beginnings, not lawsuits and betrayals. Sometimes I'd see my parents in passing. Once, at the grocery store, Mom froze in the cereal aisle. We stared at each other for a heartbeat too long. She gave a small nod, half smile, and walked away. No words, no apologies, just acknowledgement. It was enough. Sabrina's path was less clear. Through acquaintances, I heard she'd moved north working odd jobs. There was talk of her trying to start over, maybe even volunteering at a shelter. I chose to believe that part. Hope costs nothing, and I had enough scars already. The last time I visited Pamela's grave, Irvine was awash in sunset. I brought coffee, hers black, mine with cream, and sat on the grass. I did it, I whispered. It's all set up. You'd like it, Grandma. You really would. The breeze picked up, warm and steady. Maybe it was coincidence. Maybe not. Before I left, I pressed my palm against the cool marble and said, "Thank you for teaching me that family isn't about who demands your loyalty. It's about who earns your respect." Walking back to the car, I realized the fear was gone. The resentment, too. What remained was clarity, a kind of quiet that doesn't come from victory, but from peace. I wasn't the same woman who had walked into that dinner months ago, blindsided by greed and betrayal. That version of me had been built from compliance, from wanting approval. The woman walking away now was built from boundaries. Life doesn't hand out perfect endings. It hands out lessons wrapped in chaos. Pamela's last gift to me wasn't the trust fund. It was the reminder that stability, emotional, financial, spiritual, isn't inherited. It's built, choice by choice. As I drove home through the soft lights of Irvine, I rolled down the windows, let the wind rush in, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel watched or judged or small. I just felt free.